Hello everyone and good afternoon, just about as we tick over to 12 p.m. I hope you're all well and thank you for joining us today. My name's Luke. I work for Barclays Eagle Labs as an ecosystem manager here in the South Coast. So I'm joining you from Southampton today. And I'm really excited to be joined by our guest today, Ryan from Hybrid Legal, who's going to be sharing with us some useful tips around AI and the law and how to stay ahead specifically of the risks. Before we get started, however, I'm just going to take the opportunity to signpost a few bits of our proposition from Barclays Eagle Labs that are open to all. So do have a look at some of the proposition that we offer. Specifically, we have just launched a new Eagle Labs Communities platform, which is pretty much a one-stop shop to access all of the bits that I'm just going to talk about now. So the URL for that is labs.uk.barclays/community. And on there, you're going to find some details around some of the support programs that we offer through Eagle Labs. So anything from getting investment ready to scaling, we've got programs that are designed and delivered around that. We have an amazing network of mentors that we can offer through Eagle Labs, both technical as well as business mentors. So we can plug you into a session with a mentor. We've got a great investor connectivity platform called Demo Directory. So if you're ready to raise some money to help grow your business, take a look at the Demo Directory. And then on top of that, of course, we've got ecosystem connections across the UK with 43 Eagle Labs. So if it's co-working space and ultimately local network that you're interested in tapping into, again, have a look on communities to connect with your local ecosystem manager. We'll be happy to have conversations with any one of you. So I just need to read out a quick disclaimer before we get into the main event this afternoon. So let me just read that word for word here. So we've asked Ryan to join us today to provide some tips and tricks on AI and the law and how to stay ahead of the risks. The topics discussed are an overview of options for you to think about to help you with your independent research and business decisions. They're not intended as recommendations or advice. Remember as well that your business has its own individual circumstances. The statements and views expressed may not be applicable or suitable for your business. If you found yourself today via YouTube, you can find a link to VVox in the description below. So you can join us on the chat via that. That's enough from me. Okay, so I'm going to pass you over to Ryan to introduce himself and then to dive into today's session. Over to you, Ryan.
Great. Thank you very much, Luke, for inviting me to join today. And hello, everyone. So my name's Ryan. I'm the founder of Hybrid Legal. And today I'm going to be talking to you about AI and the law and some tips for you to hopefully take away with you today and to implement in your business. Some quick questions that I like to ask at the beginning of these talks, and that is, why are you here? Because usually it could be one of three things. It might be that you're worried about falling behind your competitors that are using AI. There's obviously an awful lot of hype on social media at the moment about the different ways that you can use AI, and that can sometimes lead to businesses feeling that actually there's a fear of missing out. We need to rush and jump in and deploy it before we're forgotten. You might have your clients that are asking you how you're using AI, or you might already be using it, but you're just unsure as to whether it's right legally. And it's a bit of a minefield from what you've read and carried out with your own research. You'd like some answers. Regardless, you're in the right place, because hopefully today, by the end of it, you'll have a clear idea of what some of the legal issues are, and most importantly, how to overcome them, and give you something really that gives you a bit of confidence to use AI. Because overall, I am pro AI. I think it's certainly here to stay. And I think ultimately it's just learning how to use it the right way, ethically and responsibly. So I definitely think there's a place for it. A quick background before I get into it. So our story, as noted, I founded Hybrid Legal just over 12 years ago. And during that time, our team have helped businesses all across the UK and further afield improve their contracts. We've helped them navigate data protection issues, identifying IP, looking at what intellectual property is in the business and how can that IP be protected versus what IP belongs to somebody else and how can that be managed and licensed, looking at employment law and HR challenges, helping businesses prepare for an investment round, or looking at merging with another company, acquiring a business as part of their growth strategy, or dare I say it, one day selling and fulfilling a lifelong dream. More recently, AI has certainly come into the fold across all of these areas, and our team have been really busy over the last few years trying to keep up with changes in the law, but also different legal scenarios that are presenting themselves now that we have AI that is accessible to the masses. AI has been around for many years, as a lot of you will know, but it's only really been recently that it's been liberalised and it's been made a lot more accessible for businesses and individuals, where obviously the licence fees now are quite affordable. So that's a quick background, and hopefully, as you'll see from that experience, it gives you an idea that actually there's quite a lot of relevance to the types of law that we practice and where AI fits in. So as I've alluded to, I don't think AI is a passing trend. I think whether we like it or not, it's here to stay. Some countries and some societies are really embracing it, others not so much. The last time I checked, there was over 40,000 different third-party AI tools out there readily available. So there's a lot of noise out there, but it's working out what is going to be the right noise to listen to and to follow. So the big challenges, well, firstly, apologies for formatting error there. I've noticed there's a couple of formatting errors on the slides. Hopefully you can overlook those. But the challenges that we are seeing, particularly over the last couple of years, when it comes to working with different businesses using AI, up top is clients demanding more transparency around AI use. That's particularly the case for creative businesses, design agencies, marketing specialists, where clients, where obviously I think it's a tricky economy. It has been for the last few years. More businesses are asking for more for less, and that's putting pressure on suppliers to think of innovative new ways to supply services. And one potential solution there is AI, how AI can be used to drive efficiencies, and therefore, from the client's view, that should reflect in the price for that project. So naturally, it's been used as a bit of a bargaining chip for clients to ask about the extent of AI use. But it's not only from a pricing perspective and an efficiency perspective, it's also from a legal perspective as well, because some businesses, particularly if you're dealing with larger corporates that have their own in-house legal teams, they're very interested in how you're using AI from a risk perspective, particularly when it comes to intellectual property and data and discrimination, bias. Those are all areas that are at the forefront of quite a lot of general counsel's minds, in-house legal teams' minds, when they're engaging with third-party suppliers. You also have confidentiality risks as well. Staff using AI without proper guidance, that's another issue. Competitors using AI to their advantage, that creates a knee-jerk response to rush in without fully thinking a strategy through. And then underpinning all of these challenges is the cybersecurity risk as well, and the more sophisticated cyber attacks that we are seeing now. So there's an example, and we're going to be going through these in a little bit more detail to bring those to life. But what I want to show you next is just some headline cases that we've seen over the last year or two across the world. Up top is a legal action that was raised around about a year ago by Mumsnet. Some of you may have heard of Mumsnet. Some of you may have even used Mumsnet for some parenting guidance, but it's a forum that's been going for many years. It's got conversation-rich data, the type of data that a large language model would love to swallow up and train its wider model on, because you're using natural language the way that parents would write and advise other parents on how to solve common challenges with children. And of course, Mumsnet have suspected that OpenAI have trained their model by scraping the data on the Mumsnet forum without permission. And they've used that data to then commercialize it, sell it, and divert attention away from the Mumsnet website, where everything is now at your fingertips inside ChatGPT. And they have a real issue with that. And as a result, they are taking legal action against OpenAI. And I think that draws on a legal issue here around scraping. And this is one of the big challenges with large language models, particularly the large third-party large language models. It's the way that they've been trained, the way that their data has arrived on their platforms to train their models, which they are then charging license fees for you to access and benefit from. The challenge has been around the fact that actually not everything that you see online is readily free and available for you to use without permission. The opposite is true, actually. Quite a lot of what you see online, unless there's really narrow context and use cases, if you're going to start using somebody else's content, somebody else's data or IP for a use that could be considered a commercial use, you need to get permission to use it in that context. Otherwise, you risk what we're seeing with these headlines here. And Anthropic is an example. Some of you may use one of Anthropic's systems, which is called Claude. So there was a class action over in the US by a large group of authors, some of which actually involved past presidents, as in presidents of the US, such as Barack Obama, who wrote a book. You have a Supreme Court judge who is also an author that formed part of this class action. And the issue was around the fact that when people were going onto Claude and prompting, in the output data of Claude, they would see traces of other people's intellectual property, such as examples of a book that one of the authors had written. And there was enough evidence to obviously raise a case. And that has now proceeded to the point where actually the legal teams have agreed a settlement to the tune of $1.5 billion. So there's 1.5 billion reasons why using AI, you need to use it with caution in terms of what you're relying on with the data that it churns out, because not all of it is currently being used with the right permissions. And this case is ongoing. There's still a lot of questions to be answered around how that settlement will be reached. Most importantly, how the individual rights holders who have had their work taken without permission, how they are going to be compensated. There's a lot of loose talk at the moment around $3,000 per claimant. That may go up, may go down. It's all to be decided at the moment. But the point is, the basic principle here is the model has taken something without permission, swallowed it, used it in output data, charged people a license to benefit from that, and the original content holders, the original holders of the intellectual property, have not been notified. They haven't benefited from it. And that's at the heart of quite a lot of these cases around the world at the moment. We then have, just at the bottom there, you'll see Deloitte refunds Australian government after AI made up citations in report. So this is another area where you have a risk issue, because you can use AI for, creating ideas, doing deep research, but how far you go with relying on it when you've got one of the biggest consultancies in the world relying on AI and it being found to hallucinate for a top government report, it's a bit awkward, so that's why, yes, you can use it, it can speed up process, but this whole notion of having a human in the loop, human oversight to check what it's coming up with is really, really key, because this is a live example. It's clear that the refund that Deloitte would have given the Australian government is probably going to be more cost effective than the reputational issues this now has, based on obviously all of the news and media outlets that have taken this story. Social media has created a groundswell of it as well. And that is, I think, arguably a little bit more problematic. So again, it's just being careful with what you're relying on. And then talking about data, so personal data is another red flag, because dare I say the dreaded GDPR, I say dreaded, personally I think it's a good thing, it's there to protect all of us as individuals. When that came in 2018, one of the key rights that it granted all of us was the greater need for transparency, holding businesses to account on what personal data they hold about us, why they hold it, what is their lawful basis for holding that data? Why, what, where, when, how is it secured? Are they going to share it? If they are going to share it, who with and why? That's why privacy policies, you can't really avoid them now when you browse online. Everyone should have one, and for good reason, because it is the law. However, within that particular piece of legislation, despite AI not being as prolific as it is today, there was a piece in that particular piece of legislation that made it clear that if you are going to use personal data and automated processing to make decisions about that personal data. For example, if you think about a mortgage application, if you apply for a mortgage and AI is assessing your application, and then it creates an outcome that has an impact on you personally and your life, your livelihood. Would you be happy about the AI making that decision on its own, or would you be happier if there was human oversight with that decision? I suspect it would be the latter. And furthermore, there is also a requirement to make it really clear when you are taking somebody's personal data and using AI to do some form of processing with it. Challenge, however, is not every AI system is built from a transparent perspective. And sadly, in this case with ChatGPT, who are obviously one of the world's largest large language model providers, a lot of us use it. The Italian Data Protection Authority, so the UK's equivalent to the Information Commissioner's Office, actually fined OpenAI to the tune of 15 million euros because they believed that they were processing personal data without enough governance in place, without enough of a justification to hold that personal data. So again, it's another example of where you need to really be mindful. And a question for you all to think about is, can you remove your personal data from third-party AI? So going back to this right for all of us, where any business that we've dealt with that holds our personal data, let's say you've purchased something from a major online retailer, you do have the legal right to request them to delete your data unless they've got a legal ground to hold on to it, for example, for legal or tax purposes. Otherwise, if they're holding data for other reasons, such as marketing or profiling you as an individual, you do have a legal right to request that that data is erased. How on earth do you do that once your personal data, your profile, everything about you has been loaded into AI? The nature of AI is it continuously learns, it's autonomous. So how do you retrieve it? How do you recall it from one of the major AI providers? It's just a question to think about. We then have the emerging challenge with generative AI as we know it, which I've given you some examples with Claude, with ChatGPT. That's where you prompt, you create an input, and based on that input, it's then going to generate you something that comes out based on what you've prompted. With agentic AI, the clue is in the name, you now have an agent. So think of it as your own cyber agent, where you give your agent an instruction, such as create me, an amazing marketing campaign to bring in this type of individual with these types of social media ideas. You might want to use Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. So you give it a clear instruction, and then it will go off. And it will go off completely autonomously, and it will act on that instruction without further prompting. It's going to go off and start implementing that task for you, which sounds really good on face value in a world where the pace of life is really quick. So the temptation to use an agent to take care of some of the really important but nitty-gritty work that's quite laborious, it's a very attractive proposition. However, the challenge with it is when it goes wrong. And an example here is there's a software company called Replit, and you'll find the article in Cyber News as one example, but Replit had an AI agent that was used for helping a software developer do some coding, and the agent was doing some coding to take up a lot of the manpower of that particular coding task. And luckily, the software developer that instructed the agent to help him out with that particular task twigged that there was something not quite right. And the actual agent decided to completely delete the database. There was over 4,000 records deleted. And not only did it delete the database, it lied and covered its tracks about deleting its database. So these things can be quite sophisticated, and they are only getting better and better. And a similar scenario, actually, which I've not put on the slide, but it plays to the point around cybersecurity risk, is there was an issue about a month or two ago with a deep research agent within ChatGPT. And a user had plugged in this deep research agent into its Gmail account. So it integrated the agent with its Gmail account, which in my humble opinion is utter madness, but nevertheless, they thought brilliant, plug it into Gmail, and it started going through emails just to filter, do some research on particular trends that the user had prompted this agent to do. And with that, a cyber attacker, an opportunist, sent a phishing email which had a malicious link, but it was in white text. So the link you couldn't see, it wasn't visible, but the agent clicked it, interacted with it, opened a trapdoor, and exposed a huge vulnerability there for that particular user. And safe to say they were hacked. When ChatGPT found out about it, they plugged that hole immediately, so they were very keen to secure it and learn from the issue. But I think the point here is agentic AI, as interesting and exciting as it sounds and as it is, it still has some safety parameters that you need to think about. The guardrails have not yet been established when it comes to ensuring that agentic AI is really safe to use and to deploy. So if you are going to use it, put it in a sandbox. Don't put personal data through it. Don't plug it into your email account, whatever you do, not yet. And just approach with caution.
Ryan, just on that slide, a question came in. I thought I'd just interject there if I could. On this
Please, yeah.
generative versus agentic AI. And the question is, what are the IP implications of using generative AI to create content? Who owns the output if the model was trained on copyrighted material?
It's a really good question, and it is answered by one of my slides actually. Okay. So I'll come on to that question when I'm on the slide to talk about the IP issue around who owns IP when you use a form of generative AI, because it's a really good question.
Thanks.
Right. So this is Patrick and Eileen. Patrick and Eileen, they run a family business up in Birmingham. It's a jewelry business, as you would have guessed by the very neat display of jewelry behind them, and 29 years established. And they specialize in selling high quality jewelry, and they're real craftsmen in the field. Rather interesting, because everything I've said is total BS. They are actually, that's a generative image, so it's been generated by some form of AI, whether that was a ChatGPT, the image generator of ChatGPT, or another one. There's loads out there, so it could have been any one of them. But that is an AI image. And unfortunately, this is the other side to AI that we are starting to see more and more of now. And that is, it all depends on whose hands AI is in. And sadly, it's fallen into the hands of those that want to scam people. And we are seeing now more and more online shops popping up with authentic looking images, going after the family business look, an English family business, traditional business known for high quality, a brand you can trust and buy into because of the heritage of how long they've been established, who's behind it, you can see the people. And unfortunately, they're very good with Facebook ads. So a lot of the traffic generated for this website came in from Facebook ads, from what I've been led to believe. And unfortunately, whilst the address was listed as being in a particular part of Birmingham, which has got a good reputation for jewelry, the returns address was based in China, and the actual product that they were selling to consumers was far from the high quality products listed on the website. Unfortunately, this is not the only case. There are a lot of cases going on like this now. So, you know, it's really, really important to do your due diligence, check reviews, and don't believe everything that you see on social media. I know that's probably a given for a lot of people in the audience, but you really, really do need to challenge what you're looking at now. If it smells too good to be true, investigate it and just double check it, because as you can see with that image, it looks really worryingly realistic. Sometimes the telltale signs used to be the hands, but as you can see, his arms are crossed and you can't see her hands at the moment, but usually you would see, obviously, that would be the telltale sign. You'd see 6 fingers instead of 5, or there would be something, but you have to work quite hard to spot some irregularities with that image. So this loops to the question, Luke, that we've had from the audience around IP, which I'm going to touch on in a moment. Question for you is, are you covered? So what I would recommend to everyone that's listening in, check what license you're on when you're using third-party AI tools, whether that's Claude, ChatGPT. Check the license, because if you're on a free of charge license, there is a real high probability that in exchange for you using that AI free of charge, the large language model provider will want to take your input data and train the wider model. That's the quid pro quo. You're helping it improve, you're helping it get better. So that's the trade-off of using it for free. And usually if you want to deactivate training, you have to go into the settings of that particular system, and you'll probably have to work quite hard to find how to toggle it off. A good example, those of you that are on LinkedIn, LinkedIn has recently done an update where all of us are opted in to train the LinkedIn model until we opt out. So you have to manually opt out for LinkedIn to use our data for training its model. And you can do that quite easily. It's in your privacy settings. If you have a look in your profile and go on to settings, privacy, you'll see that there's a little toggle you can switch on and off. And if you didn't know that, go on it, because you'll probably find that yours is toggled on automatically. And that is happening more and more now. We are quietly being opted in to training these large language models. And you might be sat there thinking, well, why is that an issue? Why should I be bothered about that? Really, you should be bothered about it if you're using third-party AI tools for, let's say, for example, meeting notes. If you're using it for meeting notes, such as an AI note taker, and you're having confidential conversations about an employee, a contractor, or a client or supplier, that is a good example of where actually, if that's being shared and being used for training, it's a potential confidentiality issue, particularly if you've agreed with your client that that particular project is highly sensitive, highly confidential. But if you're using note takers that are freely using those conversations to train the wider model, when that falls into the wrong hand, it can be problematic. And I will give you an example of where that has played out. So check the small print in the T's and C's, the end user license agreement. And in fact, actually, this links to the license. My view is, go for a premium license. Rule of thumb, when you pay for something, you'll usually get better features, and usually the data security is much better, particularly from a training perspective. So certainly check the detail. I'm not suggesting that you go onto an enterprise license, but just read the detail and choose something that's appropriate for you. But my advice would be, please do read the end user license agreements for the third-party AI tools you're using, and in particular look at the privacy policy as well and see what they're doing with personal data. How is it shared? Where is it stored? So the devil really is in the detail there. Think about what data is going into AI. It's very easy to accidentally copy and paste personal data or sensitive data into AI. A good example would be copying and pasting an email trail, putting it into something like ChatGPT and asking it to analyze the email and come up with a really good response. You've just inadvertently copied someone's email address, their first and last name, an idea about them as an individual. It's all gone in, and you probably haven't asked for their permission to do that. So again, if you are going to do things like that, make sure you sanitize the data before you put it in, and then obviously update it when you take it out. So that's a quick tick there. Think about your contingency plan. What happens if something goes wrong? So what happens if you are hacked as a result of a third-party AI tool that you've plugged into your IT? Where do you go? Who do you phone? Will your IT team happily cover you and support you for something where you've plugged in a third-party AI tool without talking to them about it? Are they going to be happy to cover that within the package that you're paying them for if you have IT? Think about the contract as well and how you're managing liability in the contract for using AI. And most importantly, think about insurance. Have a chat with your insurance broker about how risk is managed with AI and how they will cover you for certain scenarios if AI is found to be the root cause of your issue. On the IP front and ownership, you'll see I've included some T's and C's there from ChatGPT. I'm not going to read it out verbatim, don't worry, but the nutshell summary is you're responsible for everything that goes in. So what you put in, that's your responsibility to make sure that you're not infringing somebody else's IP, you're not copying and pasting something that you don't have the authority to use. So that's point number one to be aware of. Be careful with what you put into it, because legally it is your responsibility. Point number two is you'll see that whilst the end user license agreement in ChatGPT in particular will say to you that you will own the IP in the output, it will also say in this particular clause here, clause 4.4, that due to the nature of OpenAI services and artificial intelligence generally, output may not be unique, and other users may receive similar content from OpenAI services. Responses that are requested by and generated for other users are not considered customers' output. So there we have it. You're not guaranteed that your output is going to be unique. And for IP, it needs to be unique. You need to be able to prove the paper trail with who created it, who was the original rights holder, and has that been legally transferred to the next rights holder, for example, or have the relevant permissions been granted. It's very difficult to do that with third-party AI, where you don't know what permissions are in place with the training data, and therefore it's very difficult to guarantee that the outputs will be legally yours to rely on. So this is still being formed at the moment from a legal perspective in terms of how does IP in this new age of generative AI actually work. Rule of thumb at the moment is use it for ideation, but I wouldn't be, if I was a creative business, I wouldn't be relying on generative AI for exclusive IP rights. I think at the moment it's still early days on that one. So, sleepwalking into a headache. This is just a quick real life example of how easy it is to sleepwalk into an issue, but most importantly, how easy it is to avoid it. So earlier this year, we were approached, and again, I'm going to anonymize the industry to preserve confidentiality, but the essence of the story is true. But we were approached by a marketing agency that was working with a healthcare brand. And this healthcare brand had commissioned the marketing agency to help them go through a white paper that had taken this healthcare brand a couple of years to put together based on lots of research, lots of really interesting data about the need in the market for a particular product that they were about to launch. And they wanted this marketing agency to create a really engaging social media campaign to pull key stats from the white paper to use it to help promote the products. And it was a highly confidential campaign. It wasn't to be public knowledge. The timing of the campaign was critical. And unfortunately, that particular marketing agency received a phone call from the legal team, the in-house legal team at the healthcare brand, to say, look, we do have a great relationship with you, which is why, we're giving you the benefit of the doubt here, but we're putting you on notice of a suspected breach of confidence because there has been a leak. We have found traces of our highly confidential white paper within the output data on ChatGPT. We cannot rule out an internal breach, but you are the only external party that has had access to this resource. So we are putting you on notice, and we suggest you go and do your investigations and work with us to establish the root cause of it. So that led them to us. We had a conversation, and it became clear very quickly that their team had not been adequately briefed on how to use AI, what AI tools to use and when to use them, and most importantly, what not to do when it comes to data and AI. And furthermore, there were some key employees on the team on that campaign that were using their own personal licenses, free of charge licenses to ChatGPT to do client work. That there was the sleepwalk into a headache, because unfortunately one of them had uploaded the white paper to do some analysis on it, to come up with some ideas, and they just didn't think about the confidential issue that arose from that simple upload action. So that's a live example of where it can go wrong quite easily. Okay, so just moving on and conscious of time. So they weren't the only ones to have done this. Samsung experienced a similar issue with a data leak on ChatGPT, where an employee accidentally leaked sensitive data. Samsung knee-jerked and banned it, and I believe they've come up with their own system. But it just goes to show that it's not only small businesses that can sleepwalk into this, it's the bigger sophisticated businesses as well. So I'm just going to go through a couple of myths before I summarize some key actions for you and what you can do. So the first myth that we hear quite a lot is there's no AI laws in the UK, so we don't need to worry about any of this. And the reality is, as you would have picked up on from this talk so far, data protection law still applies. Good old-fashioned contract law still applies. If you're agreeing to confidentiality provisions, or if you're agreeing to give your client IP in some work that you're doing, but yet you're using AI to do that work, where we know that actually it's tricky to guarantee ownership of IP, you've got some legal issues already without there being an explicit statute here in the UK to set out the do's and don'ts of how you use AI legally. You already have existing legal principles that you need to think about. And we also have the EU AI Act, which came into force earlier this year in full effect, and it's quite a draconian piece of legislation. There is a bit of pushback on it. However, the good news is the UK, it hasn't yet implemented its own version of the EU AI Act. The idea is they're going to be taking a pro-innovation approach, because they've recognised that once they bring this legislation in, it could have repercussions on innovation, investment into the UK, and they want to encourage as much of that as possible. So they're trying to tread a delicate balance between rewarding the innovators but protecting the rights holders and making sure both interests are aligned. And that's really tough, because proposals have come out and have been shot away by different creative communities for being too one-sided in favour of innovation and just giving away IP without any recognition. And then it's swung the other way, where it's just been too onerous. So at the moment, it's been put to individual regulators of different regulated industries across the UK to oversee how those businesses are using AI, until the UK government can announce a concrete piece of legislation which sets out the rule book. But of course, we will have cases that will come out that will try and test the legislation to obviously, answer questions that the legislation inevitably won't answer based on different contexts. So it is an emerging field at the moment, but nevertheless, you can do some simple things to really mitigate your risks. Next myth is policies will slow us down. I don't need a policy. This is where I think you can get ahead. So I think if you've got a well thought out AI policy that you can use externally for your customers or your clients to give them peace of mind, you've really thought through how you're using AI, and you address those issues around the data, around IP, around discrimination, bias, ethics, etc. If you cover off the core fundamentals, I think you're going to be ahead of probably a lot of your competitors that wouldn't have thought about that. But I also think the internal AI policy is really important as well, to give your team clarity on exactly, as an organization, what AI you can use, what AI you shouldn't be using, and why that is, just so everyone is consistently on the same page with how your business uses AI. And I think that is where you have the greatest risk. It won't be the leadership team. The leadership team often buy into the risks of doing things, of the risks and making sure things are done properly. It's often the team, the wider team, that are the ones more vulnerable to drop the ball, because they haven't been adequately trained. There's not been enough sensible, open communication about the subject. Myth number 3, surely we can let AI write our policies. Again, sorry about the formatting issue on the slide there, but the reality is AI can miss nuance. It can include errors and it can create risks in itself, as we saw with the Deloitte example with the Australian government report and the hallucination. So personally, I think, yes, you can use AI. It's only going to be as good as the person prompting it, knowing the prompts to give it, and also understanding context and nuance. That's really key. An example, we did see a client try and draft a commission policy. They brought it to us to review, and had we not intervened, they would have been paying commission to a business that was referring them new opportunities. They would have been paying them commission regardless of whether those opportunities converted. That was not their intention. Their intention was, once an opportunity converts, it's only then that we will pay commission. So that's just one small example. So what can you do? Practical takeaways from today. Start with an audit. This is where, going back to that point around your team, I would encourage an amnesty. And what I mean by that is I would encourage all of your team to be open and honest about what AI tools they are currently using. Don't tell them they're going to lose their jobs. Obviously, they're not, but make them feel comfortable to actually disclose what they are currently using whilst your business is learning about AI and understanding what is going to be the right AI moving forwards. Because you might find that some of your team are using some brilliant things that the wider team could benefit from, but you might also find that there are some tools in there that are quite ugly, where you can't find anything about the license terms or data, and it's generally a high risk as far as what's happening with that AI and the tools that it's using and extracting data from. So I'd highly encourage you to do an audit, document everything that you are using, list it all out in terms of all of your third-party AI tools, have a look at the data, the end user license agreements, the what, the why, the when, the how, security. And then at that point, look at GDPR and data protection. So have a look at, from a data protection perspective, does all of this make sense? Have I got a lawful basis of using these AI systems and putting the data that I want to put into it? Is there really a good legal sound argument to use it? Go through that. At that point, design your policy, both internal and external. And then at that point, you're ready to start communicating it properly to your clients and your team. So that's my quick whistle-stop tour of what you can do. Conscious that we're nearly at time, and I know there's going to be questions at the end. These are 3 questions to ask yourself. What AI tools are you using? What client and staff data is going onto them? And how would you explain your AI use to a client or colleague? You need to be able to answer those 3 questions to be in a good position. Recent example, we did have a business come to us fairly recently that was using AI, was in a bit of a mess, no clear policy, and we did a clear audit with them. And I would say that the highlight here was the fact that their CEO had the fear of missing out, their chief operations officer had the fear of messing up. Both of them were pitted against each other. One was risk averse, one was, very keen to take a risk and get on with it. And going through a process that I've just described with that blueprint and actually investigating it properly has given everyone confidence and clarity. So it's a really worthwhile exercise. You don't need to use us, you can use whoever you like. But I would say that if you've got a mixed bag in your team where some love it, some hate it, some are on the fence, doing this type of exercise can bring you all together and give you peace of mind that from a compliance perspective, you're in a pretty good position. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. There's a QR code there that you can scan, and that's just to sign up to. It's not a spam list or me sending you sales pitches. Every other Friday, I send out a free legal tip to help hopefully you and your business. So if you scan that, I'll write to you every other Friday to give you some interesting insights. And you can unsubscribe anytime. Don't worry, I'm not going to plumb your data into AI. So yeah, hopefully that was useful. But Luke, I'm happy to take any questions that have come in.
Thanks, Ryan. Really super interesting session. Questions have been coming in thick and fast. I've kind of broadly put them into 3 buckets, and you have addressed some of it already. As you were talking, obviously, we're kind of answering some of those. But the first one might have been kind of addressed by your slide around the policy and the blueprint that you shared there. But The question is, how do you recommend that businesses deal with unauthorized AI use by staff? And do you have any examples of successfully overcoming the issue?
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question. I would say it's one of the most important questions to ask for businesses that are employing people that will inevitably want to use AI. And it all comes down to how you're communicating with your team, the conversations you are having openly with your team about what AI you are using. So it goes back to the AI amnesty piece, because you can't punish someone for using AI if you cannot demonstrate that you have actually trained them and given them a really good training program where they're very clear on your business's use of AI, what tools they can use and what they can use them for, and why and how, and some training there if they need it. But most importantly, what tools are not permitted and why that is, having a conversation about that so they can fully understand why those tools aren't permitted. I think that's key. If you just say that's not allowed and don't explain, you're not going to get much compliance there. Whereas if you actually have an interactive conversation, a debate, and you talk about, some of the issues with it and why you don't think at this stage it's the right fit for the business, you've got a much better chance of getting traction and compliance there. Only then, once you've been through that process and you've documented it and you've got an audit trail to show that your team have been through that process and they have a clear policy on AI, if you don't have non-compliance, then you've got a much stronger bedrock to enforce, obviously, your policy and to take disciplinary action if need be, than what you have if you just try and go in now without doing any of that. You'll be on shaky ground. So I think it's setting yourself up for a success there by making sure your team are well versed on what the company's policy is on AI. And the policy is absolutely worthless if you just put it on your intranet and tell people to read it, in my opinion. I personally think, yes, that is good as a reference point for later, but the most important piece is actual meeting, the conversations, discussions with the team on it. That's where I think you'll get the most value and traction.
Definitely, I agree, Ryan. So the next bucket, and again, it's kind of a segue and expansion of what you've talked about there already, but the bits I've highlighted are really around expertise and resources. So the first question is, how can boards and executives meaningfully oversee AI without needing deep technical expertise? So it's that expertise element. Next one's obviously come from a smaller business here, saying, as a smaller business managing AI risk, how can we do it without enterprise level resources? So yeah, obviously two kind of scales of business there, but talking about resource and expertise, Ryan. And you've mentioned about not using necessarily, obviously any sort of models to actually generate the policy, for example, or the concerns around that.
Yeah, I think from the business that's got an executive team, and if I've understood correctly, they want to have adequate oversight, but without necessarily needing the technical nitty-gritty knowledge. I think from that perspective, that is where having a voice on the board that talks to the board, that does have the technical knowledge and can explain that in a way that is digestible for the board, is really key. And that's where your IT team, or having an internal champion of AI, so it's a bit like having a data protection officer. If you get a data subject access request come in, or you're hacked, every business should have that go-to person when that happens, that is well briefed, well informed on what to do next. I think at board level, you need to know who that person is, not only from a data perspective, but from an AI perspective. So you need to find out who that individual is. And if you don't have anyone, a good starting point is your IT team. IT should really be all over this. So they're often a good starting point, but if not, I'm always happy to be a sounding board if anyone's got any questions on that. But personally, I would say having an individual that understands the technical knowledge but can also digest that to the board is really key. So that's on the more enterprise side of things. Sorry if that sounds overly simplistic. I'm just conscious, obviously, of time. The other question around, as a small business, how on earth do you navigate it, without having to go to enterprise standards? Well, this is the exact problem with the EU AI Act. So I remember watching a Bloomberg episode. It was start of this year, towards the end of last, where they were saying that the implications that has on businesses trying to deploy AI across the EU, it's going to cost hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars in compliance, nightmare, only accessible for those with deep pockets. Great news about where AI is now is it's accessible to the masses. But from a legal and compliance perspective, I personally don't think, as long as you're not building your own AI system, I think if you're building your own AI system, you are going to need to shell out on sensible advice to make sure it's structured properly. But if you are using other people's AI, that's where I think the onus is on the supplier of that AI to be very transparent with you on what they are doing with data, what they're doing with IP, being transparent on how the model has been trained, and being open about what that means of output. And that should be readily available, whether you're paying £20 a month, £100, £200 a month. You should be able to investigate that with your current provider. And unfortunately, it's just taking the time to read and interrogate. And if you're not sure, ask the questions, because it's a good audit trail. If something does happen, you can show that you have actually demonstrated you are curious, you are asking the right questions to try and do the right thing here as a small business.
Absolutely, Ryan. Thank you for that. Okay, the last bucket before there is one just final question potentially, which we'll just sort of end on. But this last couple of questions that put into this similar bucket is around. Well, I'll pose them both to you. The first one is, where should the human in the loop be positioned to maintain the quality and accountability? And the second one's similar. What should you do when AI and human judgment conflict? Same-ish, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, it's and unfortunately, that is going to be very specific on the context of how the business is intending to use AI.
Yeah.
But I would say, rule of thumb, monitoring what goes in, I think, is really important. So I think if you have teams that are using AI, again, it depends on how prolific your use of AI is and how realistic this particular process will be. But I think having a clear log of your inputs, and that can be by having the right license with something like ChatGPT, for example, where if you need to investigate a user's inputs, unless they turn on temporary chat, for example, or erase it, being able to actually review input data that's gone into AI, I think, is a good thing. So you can just sanitize that, well, not sanitize it. Hopefully it's already been sanitized based on how you've trained your team. But I think being able to have an audit trail of what's going into AI, third-party AI in particular, is important. And I also think the human in the loop piece is definitely around output data as well. So it's looking at, well, what's the review process for signing off outputs that are going to be public facing or are going to be quite impactful to wider team. If you're just using it for ideation or research, and then you yourself are verifying that research because you're checking the sources that have been flagged and you're independently verifying that, that's great. But if you're going to be using something, you know, for a campaign, for example, you would have thought with that Australian government example, there should have been a human in the loop to double check the references at the bottom of that document to make sure that there were no hallucinations. And the reality is lawyers have made this mistake as well. It's happened in court where it's hallucinated particular case law that does not exist, and it's been very embarrassing either for the solicitor or the attorney in the US that has been called out on it. So I think the problem is we are overwhelmed at the moment, and to do that for every single thing, it's not really practical, but you need to try your best to do some of it at least. But I'm fully aware that practical implications of doing that is tough at the moment. But I'm hoping that these third-party providers get better and better. The more legal challenges out there, the better they are going to get at being all over transparency, ethics, the way that decisions can be made, and the control that you have over ensuring, you know, that it's easy to have a human in the loop to check about these things. So hopefully that answers the question, but happy to pick it up offline if not.
That's great, Ryan. Thank you. And there's just one last question that's not necessarily exactly on the subject area today, but with the knowledge and expertise you have in this, I thought I'd just pose this as a final question there, Ryan. So the question is, how do we address concerns about AI replacing or reshaping jobs while keeping our staff engaged?
Great question. It's probably one of the biggest questions that a lot of us have. It's realistic for my industry. It's realistic. I was talking to somebody in the IFA world yesterday, and they were saying about AI giving financial advice now, obviously not legally, but nevertheless, analyzing different investment patterns and coming up with some pretty good recommendations. And if that gets better, what does that world look like in future? So it's definitely a good question to ask. Personally, I think it's all about the combination of having the right humans. So if we take my industry, the legal industry, if we use my industry as an example, do I think AI can replace lawyers? I think some lawyers, yeah. Other lawyers, absolutely not. I think for lawyers that behave like robots and just follow templates, they're not engaging with their clients, they're not asking the right questions, and they're not adding value there, then absolutely, I think there is a real risk that they will be replaced by AI that will do all of that. But do I think it will replace a lawyer that can use AI to work really efficiently, knows how to prompt, knows about context, but most importantly, can ask the right questions to the client based on their experience, what they've seen in the past, and can connect emotionally? I think that's irreplaceable personally. And you'll probably think he's bound to say that, he's from the legal industry, but I would say the same is true whether it's for doctors, financial advisors, other skilled professions. I definitely think there is still a place for the human alongside AI, but again, I think it's inevitable that there are some particular types of job that will be swallowed up. But I think it's the employer's duty to think about how they can take the employees affected on a journey where AI can help enhance a new role for them, or they can find an alternative role that will be suitable. I think, and that is something that I think certainly under this government, I would expect to be seeing that at some point. You won't just be able to cut your team. There will be legal implications. There will be protections in place. Certainly from what I'm hearing from various trade unions, they are all over that question, and they want to make sure that there are some safeguards there from companies just cutting. So I think, I know that's quite a roundabout answer, but I'm hoping that gives you a bit more flavour and context.
That's great. Thank you, Ryan, for that answer and for the session today. It's been super interesting. I'd like to thank you once again for joining us today and delivering that. Any final comments from you there?
No, just thank you very much for listening. And look, this is a move. It's changing all the time. So what's law today could be different, later. So I'm hoping that this has just given you some insights and some guidance. But if you have any questions, you're very welcome to get in touch with me. Please follow up either email, LinkedIn, whatever you prefer. Always happy to help if I can.
Thank you, Ryan. And thank you to the audience today as well for the questions that were flying in there. That leaves us with me just closing the session today and just to give Eagle Labs one last final plug. So if you don't know what we do at Eagle Labs, do have a look at our website, labs.uk.barclays, to find out more about the support that's available to your business like yours. We've just launched and have a lot more on the horizon for 2026. So whatever stage of your business you're at, definitely check us out for more about our free support that we offer. If you're already a member or connected to us, reach out to us or contact us to find out more about the latest support. And then that leaves me just to say, I hope you have a good rest of the day, and thank you once again for joining. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks.